cute little teddy, doesn't it?
Yeah. Has there been any birds living in this little birdhouse?
No, that's just an ornament. But we've got lots of birds in the garden, parrots and
Where were the bellbird
cockatoos, and that was just up in here.
Oh, okay.
Maybe there's a bit of it left up in one of the little clefts of the thing there. But one of them, the other day, one of Roy's friends that he grew up with, I went to his funeral in Nanny and was asked to do the eulogy, about him. And he was about our last link. He didn't live here, he lived in Murray. He went up, the family moved up there, and he worked in the coal, not in the mines, but in the boiler rooms and things. But they were, his whole heart was back in Tynong North. They used to come and visit Roy, and then after Roy died, he'd come back and visit me. And so that. Yeah, just around the back door, and I was obvious. Can't see it from the road there. We don't. We're not at popping things off. Built that to shift all Max's junk off his block of land to build his house, because Max had steam. He used to go to every farm.
Steam engine, or you can drive it through belts.
I was telling him that when the steam mill finished around the road a bit, that Dad moved it up onto the farm, and then the kids from Maryknoll were vandalising too much, so Bruce rebuilt it here.
It was getting smashed up.
Yeah.
You know. So we're just cutting up bits, like stripping the engines.
Well, we'll go in for a bit clear, and then we'll go in.
Yeah.
You might be able to do some of the
lines across on those things. It goes through the saw at the bottom on the other side, and comes out a cinder on the other side.
And you can adjust that to different sizes?
Yeah. And this is an old shed that, it was an old church. The rafters came from an old church. And I just modified them and built it around the trees. Sagged a little bit here and there, but
Yeah.
Not too bad.
Still covers.
Yeah, still covers it.
Linda reckons Bruce has been building his shed every year of their married life.
Oh, not quite. 31 years now.
Is this one open, Bruce?
Yeah. There's not 31 sheds here though.
No.
Cool. Sawmilling stuff in here.
There. There's another cane.
That's a cane locomotive.
That was bought in, that wasn't
Yeah.
an original.
No. So what is it? They actually drive, the belt's still on the flywheel up there, and they drive things with the belt. And that's like a saw bench.
That's the one that used to drive the sawmill over near our stores.
It's an engine, is it?
Yeah, Dame Nellie Melba's father owned that, so it sings. Doesn't whistle, it sings. Last one was at the...
It's a bit dangerous to fire it up now.
Yeah, what was it in Warrigal?
Lardner Park.
Lardner Park.
Lardner Park, yeah.
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 It's been down at the Science Museum in Melbourne
Yeah.
for a while, it was down there.
Yep.
And
Beautiful, isn't it?
It is, it's very nice. Classic lines, aren't they?
Mm.
Nice design.
I remember when this was driven. That
Yes.
distance, was it to Warrigal?
Yeah,
I remember that.
yeah.
And didn't we drive behind it in the T Fords or something?
Yeah, probably did, yeah.
And all the grandkids in the back?
Yep.
Look at Beanie.
Yeah. Sit. Oh.
Lie down. She's so sweet.
Yeah.
She's smiling.
She's friendly with everyone, isn't she?
Yeah.
this is one that David's thinking about doing up. Grandad bought that from a friend not
Jembrook.
a couple of years before he died, actually.
Yeah.
But
He started to do work on it.
yeah, but this one, the wagon, this travelled behind that big traction engine in the other shed over to Emerald for the what there, and we went over there following the traction engine.
Yeah.
It was a great trip. We've got a video of that going over to Emerald. It's a fair way to go through the hills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool old wagon. I bought it from...
This is all the old blacksmith stuff in the first part here.
Yeah.
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 It was used on the farm.
I haven't been in these
Did all
sheds
the
since I was
hay carting and all
Yeah.
that
tiny kid.
sort of stuff.
It's been ages.
Bringing back memories.
Yeah.
That drives the mill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drove the mills, yeah. Oh, you've got some hearing up here, Bruce.
Might be too dark in here, Clea.
Seems like it's all right, actually.
Okay.
You'd lock them in Andrew's soundproof studio.
Yeah, could we? Let's do it.
Might bite you though if you go in there.
There we go.
My granddaughter Clea has come to visit me. And she'd like to talk to her about my growing up years. and where I was born and things like that. So the best place to start is that I was born in 1922 in Leongatha, which is a country town in South Gippsland. And Mum and Dad had 5 in the family, but the eldest little boy in the family, Mum took him to Melbourne to visit her family, and he got meningitis, and that little fellow died. But the next one was Harold, my brother, the only brother, and then my sister Vi, and then Dot, and then me. I don't remember a lot about Leongatha because I was only 5 or not much older when we moved away from there. I'd just started school, but Dad decided that Harold needed to go to technical school, and that was why he moved. But my father was a plumber in the town with his brother, and we lived just on the outskirts of Leongatha in a nice little wooden house, and walked to school. And I have few memories of around that area, just being in the school ground, and also walking home from school. And
How far was it to school?
it was only, I suppose it wouldn't have been half a mile or something like that. It wasn't far, but I liked to join in all the things that my brothers and sisters did at that age, like you all do. We all went to the little Methodist Sunday school, and we had Nanny living with us, who was my mother's mother, and Nanny was a very, very vital part of my life. So my earliest memories of any time was being out in the yard with Nanny, who was cutting some kindling with the little Tommy axe, and a tramp came up the drive, and because that was the days of the real depression, and there were a lot of these people around, and I must have got a big fright, and I can remember hiding under Nanny's long black skirts that she wore, and then Mum and Nanny would take the tramp inside and give him a feed and give him little jobs to do. But that is my very earliest memory. It's funny, isn't it? Because I probably would have been maybe 3 or by that time.
So a tramp was a wandering...
Yes, they were men who couldn't get work in the Depression, and they just travelled through the countryside and just, really just worked for food. They couldn't earn much money. But Dad was always because he worked for himself as a plumber, he was okay. So then we moved down to Newport. Not quite sure how Dad, I think it was because Dad worked at Nettlefolds, which was an engineering place somewhere down there. That's probably why they went to Newport. But we soon met some lovely people in the Baptist church there, and rented a house from one of them. But it seemed like we'd just get settled in a house, and then the people would want to sell it or something. And so we really lived in about 5 or 6 places around Newport. And I think now, fancy poor Mum having to shift all that, every time, all the things you have to shift out of one house into another. But we thought it was wonderful because it was a new place to explore. Always a new garden. I think I remember the outside of the houses and the gardens more than I do the inside of the houses, really. Because I suppose that's where we played the most and spent a lot of our time. But the first little house was a little wooden place, and we always thought it was haunted because in one corner of it, when you stood in the corner, the floor used to go up and down, and we kids thought that was pretty great. And the people from the church had one boy that was a Down syndrome boy. Very nice boy, but he used to make us kids do what he wanted us to do. And he loved to pretend to be conducting the choir. So he used to get us all in the fernery, and we'd have to sit there and sing for him while he conducted us. but he was a harmless sort of a boy. And then then we moved over the road into a bigger house with a big yard, and Dad always made a nice garden, and that one had a shed up the back, and that's where we used to hold our penny concerts and invite all the kids around and charge them a penny to come to this concert. And as I say in one of my poems, that we never got rich doing that, but we had a lot of fun. And somehow or other, I remember the different flowers that grew in the gardens, and the little phlox flowers that Dad had in that garden. Just
Is that this poem in Childhood Dreaming? Is that it?
Yes, it could be. Yeah, this little poem that is just one that I wrote about the childhood dreaming, the things that we did in our very early days. And I used to do this too with Clea and Emma when they were little girls, take them out into the garden and show them the hollyhocks and show them and we used to look for fairies in them. Do you remember? Yeah. So this one is called Childhood Dreaming. There's a touch of spring in the air today, scents and sounds that seem to replay echoes of dreams of when I was small, magic days beyond recall. There's a garden that I seem to see where hollyhocks tall are growing free. I turn round twice and stretch and stare to see if a fairy is hiding there. There's the gurgling sound of a running brook. I hasten buttons to unhook. I paddle and splash and watch the breeze float flower boats downstream like ships on the seas. I gather wild violets and daisies sweet and join them up to make a wreath and sit like a queen with a royal crown on a throne of moss as soft as down. Twilight years have caught up with me. Memories fade, but I still clearly see those halcyon days, sweet to recall, the innocence of magic when I was small. I think the love of gardens has gone on to my granddaughter Clea and to the other children, because when they come to visit me in this old house that's over 63 years old now, they love to just wander around and have a look at Nanny's garden. That was their favourite place. We've got a lovely photo of the boys up the oak tree, the 5 little boys having a wonderful time down there, coming visiting when they were small. But I think the next house we moved to was in these weren't far from each other. They were all centred around Newport and around where the school was, and the state school, and the.
Was that on the coast, Newport?
It's near not that far from the sea, not far from Williamstown. Williamstown's the beach, but no, Newport wasn't far. We used to walk to Williamstown, but mostly ride our bikes. But and that house in Junction Street, that was very close to one of the ladies who used to make all the costumes for our concerts. When at the church they always had a concert at the end of each year, and gymnasium, and the costumes were made out of crepe paper, absolutely beautifully made, and Mrs. Lowndes was the one that used to cut them out, and that was a good place to live. I was right near Mrs. Lowndes. We were pansies with pansy faces, and we were daisies, and we were little Dutch children, and we did one called Rendezvous that was about an old-fashioned garden where the statues came to life. They were beautiful concerts, really, and lots of fun for us kids, but lots of hard work.
Were they Sunday school concerts? Or?
Yeah, Sunday school concerts, and the gymnasium was part of the church there too. Yeah, so that was Junction Street, and the saddest part there was that was where Nanny fell and broke her hip, and in those days you couldn't do anything like you could do now for old people, and so Nanny after that was always in bed, but Mum cared for her, and she was always part of the family. It didn't matter if she was in bed. She was everything that happened revolved. Always told Nanny what happened. If you go in and talk to her, and people used to visit her, and young people used to visit her. And then we moved to the other side of the railway line that was close to everything really, just the same, and lots of fun there. That was where we had our boobiella tree, that we had our little tree house up in that, and where we used to dash up there if Mum was cross with us, because she used to sit down there wagging her finger at us, and we were quite safe up there. And Harold made me a bike, made Dot a bike, a really nice little bike. He was very clever with his hands, a little push bike. Yeah.
You made it?
Well, he put it together out of all old bits and pieces, because we certainly didn't have much money in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And the bike was lovely, and one day I took it out and went riding around in the street, and there was a horse and cart up ahead of me, and I couldn't stop in time, and I hit this, came off, and had to come home with a buckled wheel on Auntie Dot's bike. But Harold forgave me. He was a very, very good big brother. And but from there we used to ride our bikes down around the Yarra, down to where the Yarra River, there was a ferry, what they called the punt in those days, that crossed the river, and you could put your bike on that and then go over to the other side. And Vi and Harold used to go down to what they called the Warmies. It was a power station, and the water that came through the machinery and things in there used to come out warm, and they used to swim and things in there, but we weren't allowed to do that, Dot and I. But it was a great place to grow up. It wasn't it was an industrial part of Melbourne in those days, but plenty of room to play and plenty of open spaces and things around us. And then we moved to the best house of all, which was in Spate Street, and that had a very big yard. It was like a double block, belonged to my girlfriend Barbara's auntie, and it was about over 100 years old, a big, roomy, beautiful old house. And so we had lots of fun in that place, because there was plenty of room for all sorts of imaginative games. I wrote a poem about the living in this house when I was a young person.
Is it that one?
No, it's the one called...
My Secret Place?
No, it was the one about the... we better turn that off for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
As I was saying, I wrote a poem about our backyard in Spate Street. It was just a wonderful place to grow up. Our backyard was a wonderful place to try bright ideas galore. A double block, plenty of room, it opened imagination's door. Garden sheds became two tall ships that sailed the Spanish Main. The chook house with its guillotine door earned French Revolution fame. We never did chop off a head, you know, no matter how hard we tried, though those blessed chooks had more than 9 lives, no matter what arts we plied. A wire rope stretched from the chook house roof to the trunk of a tall gum tree. I can still see my sister Dot wire balancing there while we watched in awe silently. The cubby house was cunningly hid in the heart of a coprosma tree. Many a secret meeting was held, no boys allowed there, you see. The boobiella became a treehouse refuge when Mum was mad at me. I'd hide out up there till she forgot why she was cross with me. But my best bright idea was to parachute from the top of the fernery roof. I waited till I heard the gate click and Mum was off up the street. Holding Dad's brolly over my head, I leapt for the lawn below. Alas, I landed with the most awful thump. What an embarrassing end to the show. Evidently not for me the graceful glide, the wind whistling round my head. My sister had started praying. She really thought I was dead. That wretched brolly had turned inside out. Now how would I explain that another wonderful, beautiful, bright idea had turned into trouble again? It seemed like we were always doing things that, like usual kids things. There was another thing too, I forgot to say, that when I was only a little girl, I was 2 when my grandma came to visit from Melbourne. My father's parents lived in Collingwood, and grandma came up and she brought this beautiful teddy bear, and Teddy Bear became my very best friend for life, and I've still got him because yes, I've still got Teddy, and he's 82 now, but he didn't always look like this until a few years ago. He looked a very sad bear because after I'd grown up, my mum made him a new coat of an old brown sort of woolly coat that I had, and bits of him, I think one leg had dropped off or something. He was a very sad bear, and I had a friend who started to make teddy bears, and I said to her, "Have you ever restored an old bear?" And she said, "Well, I could give it a go." But when she saw Teddy, she nearly changed her mind. But anyway, she did it for me, and he started off. She said,
Can you show the sound?
There he is. Yeah.
And make him make his noise?
Yes, but I'll just tell you that he...
oh, yeah.
When I asked Annie about doing him, she said, well, nowadays you can get the proper mohair covering, the same things that teddy bears had in those days. And I said, all right, we'll do that. And when she made the pattern, she sort of opened him up and she found a little bit of his old fur, and it was exactly this colour, and it was exactly this mohairy stuff, so we know that he looks exactly as he did when he was born. But also his little grunter that he had inside of him, it hadn't worked since he was about 10 years old. It had stopped working, and my brother and my sister decided that they would fix him, and so Harold was a doctor and Vi was a nurse, and they put him on the kitchen table and sent me outside the door, and they operated. They opened him up the back, and I was so upset. I was outside the door just howling my head off the whole time the Teddy was in on the table. And Harold tried very hard, but he couldn't fix that grunter, so he never really grunted again until Annie got hold of him. And then she said to me, well, you know, you can get those proper grunters now. And I said, well, go ahead and put one of those in him. And all the time I was handing over $50 and $50, you know. And then by the time I'd got to about the third, I thought, I hope he really looks like Teddy when he's finished, you know. But it was absolutely amazing. When I got him back, he was exactly my Teddy. And you can see from his photo when he was about 10 years old in this one. I'll just hold it up. He was about 10 years old in that one, and you can see he's still got the same wistful, inquiring expression that he's had all his life. He was just beautiful. And of course, he had his grunter again. Oh, wait a minute. So, I thought Teddy needed a poem too. And this poem became quite famous because we would take Teddy, when I belonged to the Bunyip Choir, we would take Teddy along when we went to visit the old people in the retirement homes. And I would do the poem, and then the choir would sing the Teddy Bear's Picnic, and then we would hand Teddy around, and all the old people would have a nurse of him and a cuddle of him, and they just loved that. So this is Teddy's poem. Teddy. He came to live with me when I was 2. The family told me, so it must be true. A present from Grandma, and as she gave him to me, he gave a big growl. I lost my dignity, I ran for my life, and there was no way I'd cuddle that bear on my 2nd birthday. They sat him on a chair, and so wistfully he gazed at me. At last my curiosity overcame my fear, and I patted him. I tickled his ears, and under his chin. He looked at me with his eyes bright black, and from that magic moment we've never looked back. My very best friend he was destined to be, and Teddy was as real as my family. As the years went by, his fur became rough, and his growly voice was weak and gruff. With my brother the doctor and my sister the nurse, they operated, but his growler got worse. Those telltale stitches you can still see today. I cried my eyes out on that fateful day. When I was married years later, Teddy came with me to a house on the hill in Tynong country. He'd been recovered in an old coat of brown. His morale was not good, and his ego was down. Too fragile for with my children to play, I sadly decided to put him away. In a box in the cupboard, I'm ashamed to say, Teddy wiled many long years away. You can guess his delight when one glad day I took him out, and he heard me say, Teddy, when Annie fixes you, you'll be as good as new, I promise you. Teddy's sure, whatever his looks, she will, with the heart of a child, love him still. But Teddy, he did look like Teddy, and he's just beautiful, and he's been such a joy to so many old people since he's been restored, and now he's 82.
Just go like that. You've got a mozzie on the end of your nose.
Have I got a
Yeah,
mozzie?
there we go. He's been sitting on
We
there.
really need a bit of spray. I might have some in there.
All right.
We'll just go on. My sister Dot and I attended the Williamstown Girls' School. Harold had already gone on to Footscray Technical School, and Vi, who was the brains of the family, she went to Williamstown Girls High School. She was very good at French and all that. Eventually became a teacher and a librarian. But they must have thought that it'd do Dot and I good to go to a girls' school and learn to cook and to do all the things that you do, ironing and all that sort of thing, and I didn't like any of that. But anyway, one of the little things I've written about school is we used to ride our bikes from Newport to Williamstown. That was good fun. I liked all that part. But the awful tunics and black stockings that we had to wear, they were a pain. But I've just written this little thing because cooking, I always seem to get headaches on cooking days, and Dot used to get the very best of marks for cooking, and so I could never keep up to her standard when I got there. I came along 2 years after Dot with the same teachers. But anyway, I've just written a little thing about Williamstown Girls' School. Those days at Williamstown Girls' School had their small embarrassments. The black stockings that sagged and wrinkled, the garter that secured them needed hitching at awkward moments. We were all very much in awe of Miss Stocks, our headmistress, matronly, full-bosomed, dressed in severe suits and the inevitable flat, heavy brogues that seemed to creep up behind you. It was cooking day, traumatic enough for me with a teacher with a very acute sense of smell. I can still hear her. "Something's burning, girls, fly," as we rushed to our respective pots and ovens. I groaned. It was my turn to wait on the tables, and sure enough, to wait on Miss Stocks, the headmistress. In my usual scatter, I had forgotten my cooking cap and had to borrow my friend's. I managed the soup and the main meal, and feeling much more confident, I pushed my friend's cap firmly on my head and sallied forth. Heaving a sigh of relief, I placed the sweet from the correct side firmly in front of the headmistress. In my hasty relief, I turned quickly. Off flew the cap, landing firmly on the top of her sweet. I stood riveted to my spot, my cheeks scarlet. She slowly picked up the hat, sat staring at the name written in clear black letters. "I thought your name was Alice Cochrane. I will see you later in my office." How could fate do this to me, I thought, as I stood outside her office door, pulling and hitching nervously at those wretched wrinkled stockings. I entered to hear once again the familiar, inevitable lecture. Those days. I did find out after I left school that I had needed glasses. I was very short-sighted, and children don't know how to explain that to parents in those days, I suppose. And I was 16 before I got glasses, and when I got them, it was in the evening. It was the Friday night shopping at Footscray, and I had to pick these glasses up. And I remember, putting them on and walking out and looking up at the sky. I just couldn't believe that was what was in the sky. I used to see little round luminous things, but this canopy of prickle little dots everywhere. There was just millions of stars. It was the biggest shock of my life. And of course then I could start seeing birds, and all my friends knew what makes car were, and I didn't know, but now I realised that I had missed out on an awful lot, and that was probably why I didn't really enjoy school as much. I loved history and English and music that we did at school. I loved that too, but as for maths and cooking and all the social graces that you're supposed to learn at a girls' school, that didn't go down so well with me. I wrote this little poem about if I could, I'd be a child again. And in that I'd speak a little bit about the school days too. If I could, I'd be a child again with boundless energy. I'd stand on my head, do cartwheels and climb the nearest tree. I'd explore new tracks, climb new heights with legs like a mountain goat, recapture the wonder of curiosity with imagination and delight. I'd try to forget those school days of tunics and black stockings, where to be late for class or skip homework was considered really shocking. Reflecting back, perhaps they thought it would finally dawn on me that studying wretched grammar and decimal points could be some use to me. I'd experience again the cheerful warmth and safety of family, where a tantrum of two was dealt with firmly, that I can guarantee. If I could, I'd say thanks to those dear old friends who encouraged and nurtured me. Their values of life, unknowingly learnt, shaped my destiny. If I could, in my sunset years, I'd make it a priority, when my bits and pieces creak and groan and refuse to behave for me, I'd listen to that inner child who whispers, if you're real smart, the secret of a fulfilling old age is staying young at heart. Doesn't matter about the bits and pieces. Yes, so they were, my girlfriend Barbara lived in the next street. That was one of the real pleasures of coming to live in Spade Street. And Dot's friend Winnie didn't live far away, and Vi's friend lived next door to Barbara. So we did very well in Spade Street.
Is that where you met Barbara?
No, I met Barbara when I first came from Leongatha.
Oh,
we were little girls, and we went to the same school, but we went to Sunday school together, and our parents were friends in the church. But Barbara and I, we had a great system. I think we were influenced by Anne of Green Gables when we grew up, because we just loved her books. And so we had a flag system fitted up in the backyard, and a white flag or something was to say I'm at home, but a red flag was come quickly, I've got something important to tell you. And when Barbara stood up on her fence around in the next street, she could see my flag on my fence and vice versa. So that worked very well. And Barbara was the one that joined in the making these sheds into ships and all that sort of thing, because we went back to visit that house years after, when we'd grown up, and we got up onto the roof like we used to when we were kids, and we were going to jump over to the next one, and Barbara nearly fell down in between. We just weren't game. What you do as children is altogether different to what you do when you're grown up, you know. But that garden had some lovely things. It had 2 big almond trees, and the blossom was absolutely beautiful, and the blackboy rose grew over the back of the garage, and it was just a lovely old house, roomy old house to grow up in. And Nanny was there. Nanny was still alive when we first went to Spate Street, and everything that happened you'd always go in and tell Nanny if you'd been out anywhere. And I used to do my homework on the end of Nanny's bed because she just liked the company, and so I'd sit there and do my homework, and then I used to read her Valerie Drew detective stories. I'm sure Nanny enjoyed them. I was saying that Nanny was a very vital part of the family, and I used to love doing my homework on Nanny's bed. And then I used to get a weekly paper and Schoolgirl's Own or something or other, and Nanny, I used to read Nanny Valerie Drew detective stories. Valerie Drew had this Alsatian dog that helped her too, a bit like the one on Rex, Inspector Rex, and Nanny she just liked to have me around, and the others were very good to her too. And the junior endeavourers we belonged to at the Baptist Church, they had junior, intermediate and senior endeavour, and the juniors used to come and sing to her and bring flowers and things like that. And also the intermediate endeavour leader was a young fellow, about 17, hair stood on end, rough-looking fellow. He was just lovely. He used to come in and sit beside Nanny and talk to her and read the Bible to her and just give her company. And I can remember the minister one day at our church preaching about this wonderful old lady that he went to see. If he ever felt a bit down, he would go and visit Granny. And I knew he was talking about our Nanny, so I was very proud of Nanny. But I think just about 13, I suppose, was when Nanny got very sick, and she passed away. And but we still lived in Spate Street, and by that time, we were getting older and enjoying all the socials and the outings, and we used to go and stay with the Endeavour in other country towns and things, and there was lots of social life. We certainly never were lost for anything to do, and then we were allowed to ride our bikes down to Williamstown Beach just on our own, and go swimming. And they had a shark net there in those days. It was very good, and and they had a sort of a diving board thing further out, and of course we were very brave when we swam out to that, but it was a pretty safe beach, and there were lifeguards. Auntie Vi was in the lifesavers. She was one of the girls in the very good swimmer. She got her medallion pretty early. She was very good, and there were baths there at Williamstown too that we used to go to from the Williamstown Girls' School. We would walk down there crocodile fashion, one after the other, and go to the baths and have our swimming lessons, and that's where I got my junior certificate, I remember. But years later I read that a big storm blew the shark net away and the baths. So, but it's still quite a nice beach down there, but very different to when we were kids. Very safe in those days. And we used to ride our bikes down to Williamstown Pier and watch the ships come in, and Mum would have had 40 fits if she'd known we were down there watching the sailors. And also I got tar on my leg or something, and the sailors actually took us onto the boat and washed my leg with kerosene. Well, imagine nowadays, your parents' hair would stand on end if they knew this was going on. And around Newport there were these big quarries where they must have got stone out in the past, but they used them to put their barrels of tar in and different things there was a bit of rubbish and stuff in them, but they still had little paths and things around, and we used to ride our bikes around these, and I don't think Mum ever knew we did that because it was quite dangerous round and round and up the rims of these quarries, you know. And then there were lovely walks out in the flats around Williamstown, lots of, and Newport, lots of open spaces, and we'd go mushrooming and pick wildflowers and things that were around. It was a very, and we used to go and watch the people who went to the Williamstown races coming home in their car, and we'd look at their faces and we'd say, they've lost, they've won. No idea what they really had done, but anyway, no, there were lots of things to keep us amused in that area. And then, of
Singing?
course...
Singing? Did you do singing?
Yeah, I was in the choir.
You were in the
yes,
choir?
and when I got a bit older, I was in the choir, and I just loved the choir. I used to sing alto and soprano, I think, but very proud day when we joined in with the Baptist Assembly Choir, and we did the, under Malcolm Sargent, who was a very good conductor, we did the Messiah in the Melbourne Town Hall, and I was only 17 at that stage. Goodness knows goodness knows how many right notes I sang, but but it was a great experience. It was just lovely. And he was the kind of conductor that if he heard a wrong note, he could point to the person who did it. But anyway, I really just enjoyed that, and by that time, my Dad would never let us have a piano in the house for some reason. I don't know why, but Vi and Arthur heard that an auntie was selling this piano, and while Dad was away on one of his trips that he had to go for work, they got the piano and brought it into the house, and I was just so happy. I just started to teach myself from any little book that I could find, and then eventually I started taking lessons with one of the ladies from the church, and I just loved that, and within no time I was playing Chopin Polonaise and all the things. I learned very fast, but I learned faster than the theory. I never really learnt enough theory when I was doing it, and I only learned for about 18 months, not 2 years, because Audrey got married, but that was a very good help to me. I used whatever ability I had through all my life then for Sunday school and for all the things that I was involved in, the youth group and all that. And so I'm very grateful to Vi and Arthur. And when Mum died, I didn't want anything from the house except the piano. I didn't care what happened to anything but the piano. We were still living in Spate Street, and Mum hadn't been well for a while, and then by that time I was working. I got a job first. The first one I got was in a little embroidery place, and that I didn't stay there very long, and then I got a job with one of Vi's friends in a factory that made cardboard things, and then they made little tags for sheep, and I was given quite a responsible job with the changing the little numbers and things on this press for the sheep's ears. They had to go up to thousands, you know. And one day I was working this machine and the belt broke and came down and took off the first joint of my finger. And at that time Mum had a stroke. She wasn't well, and she was in the next door neighbour's house, and Dot and I were in the house with Dad. And then I can remember going in to see Mum with my hand all bandaged up with a tea towel over it, you know, and I remember her saying to me, "You've got a big bandage on your hand," and I said, "Oh no, it's all right, just a little thing, you know." And that night Mum went into hospital and she died that night. And but I at that time I wasn't getting on very well with Dad, and not finding it easy. And so my sister Vi, when she came down from the Kyabram, she'd married by that time, she decided that it was far better for Dot and I to board somewhere, not to stay in the house with Dad. And I'll always be grateful for Vi for that, because we went to board with a very nice family from the church, and continued doing the same things, going to work and going to the same, gymnasium and all the things we were in from there.
So your
And
dad was still at the house?
He lived in the house.
Alone?
Yes. Yeah.
Why was your mum next door?
No, she wasn't next door. No.
I thought you said it but just before. Sorry, I'll just...
Living at this with these friends in Newport, but still doing the same things. And then, of course, not long after Mum died, war broke out, and I can still remember sitting in church and listening to the minister. That the day that was the day after they announced that the war had broken out, and listening very seriously to what was going on. And I remember the text that he preached on that day, and it was, in quietness and in confidence will be your strength. And that's what he gave us to go through the war. And it was very, and wasn't long after that Dot and I decided to go and work at the aircraft factory that was at Newport, where they had the railway workshops. And it was through that we met Margaret Colson, who was a friend of the Weatherheads, and that's how the association came with the Weatherhead family. But the aircraft days were so very interesting, because I was working in the part where we were all in the same section actually, but then Mr. Hewitt, our boss, who was a really nice boss, he sort of chose me to be what they call a chaser, and that was where you sat at the desk in the front of the section and you had the list of all the parts that everybody needed for the next day or the following day, and you had to go around the whole factory and make sure that that part was going to be in the section at the time that they wanted it, So I had the run of the whole factory. I knew everybody, because I had to just go around and make sure it got through from where they were doing something to the inspection part to the baths, and make sure it got through to the section. And then when they wanted someone in the main office to change over the plans, you had to bring them from the main office and go and put the new one in, take the old one out and back to the office, and that was destroyed. I had that job too, if they ever needed one so it was very interesting. But the lovely part too was that they had a social club, and they arranged concerts every lunchtime. We had concerts in the canteen, and that was where I blossomed, because I used to do a lot of singing in the canteen with the mic and all the old songs, the Roses of Picardy and Danny Boy, and all those lovely old songs. And I remember when I was getting married, after I'd met Roy, and the war had nearly ended, and I was coming up, they said, "Why are you taking that beautiful voice to North Tynong? Where's that?" So, but I really enjoyed doing that. And my boss, Mr. Hewitt, rang me up years and years afterwards, out of the blue, rang me one day and he said, "I've just heard they'll always be in England, and I saw you in the canteen singing, so I've rung you to talk to you." But while I was at the aircraft, I met a young man in the section, nice, gentlemanly young fellow, and sort of got friendly with him, and he asked me out, and we started to go out together, and we went to the films and the things, and then I took him to our church, of course, and we got on fine, and then we decided to get engaged. But one of the things was that we were boarding, and I hadn't said that after we met Margaret Colson at the aircraft, she had an auntie and an uncle who wanted to move into a house in Williamstown, and so we decided to all combine. There was Dot and I, my sister Dot and I, and Margaret, whose husband was a prisoner of war in Burma Railroad, and her auntie and uncle and an invalid aunt and my father, and we all moved into this house at Williamstown, and it was quite a good arrangement. And Auntie Vina was a good cook, but I never got a chance to really learn anything much about housekeeping or cooking or anything when you're boarding all the time. And also, if you can't take home a young man that you know to a home, we always had to sort of do our courting out away from the home. You don't get to know them the same. And so when we got engaged, and I could see sometimes when we decided to go out, he just decided he didn't want to go, and no reason, you couldn't get him to say anything about it. And I just saw things that I'd seen in my father, and I decided that that wasn't the life for me, that didn't make for happiness. And I'm always very thankful that I did pick that up, because although I broke his heart, and although he became a Christian in the meantime, and I took him up to my sister's Vi's at Kyabram, and told him there that I couldn't marry him, and sent him back on the train. I often think about now that was a sad thing to do, but Vi was the nearest to a mother to me after Mum died, and that she was sort of my security, and I thought it was the best place to tell him. But my girlfriend Barbara's never forgiven me for that, because he boarded next door to her, and she said he came home and wept all over me. I had to console him. But anyway, he finished up. That's it, I think, isn't it? That's it. Yep.
Is that
that's
it? Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Hang on a sec. Oh, it is recording. Yeah, go ahead.
I wonder where it ended up, that beautiful old iron bedstead. The bed I shared with my sister, snuggling, giggling, fighting, conspiring. I don't know when I first discovered that the big brass knobs could be unscrewed and were hollow, a perfect secret hiding place, as one by one I hid my treasures there. Maybe in some dusty antique shop my secrets may be rediscovered. In each of the houses my parents rented with a child's ingenuity, I somehow found a secret place. I remember a secluded branch of the boobiella tree, where out of Mum's sight, tucked in the branches, swaying in my leafy hammock, I would satisfy my insatiable appetite for reading. Another house I made a comfy cubby, hollowed out under the spreading mirror bush, away from prying adult eyes, secret meetings, no boys allowed. In my teenage years, I can still remember the tang of the salt sea spray at Williamstown Beach, and the slap of the waves on this old stone breakwater at Williamstown Beach. A favourite thinking place for me in my teens, close by the unfrequented old gardens on the foreshore. On my way home to my boarding house, I would sometimes ride my bike to the old Williamstown Cemetery, go through the heavy creaking iron gates, and wander down the avenue of palms and walk amongst the historic old tombstones, not in morbid fascination, but just catching glimpses into the lives of these long ago citizens from the faded inscriptions carved in their memory. It's one of the earliest cemeteries in Melbourne, the old Williamstown Cemetery. I liked to stop a while at my mother's grave, leaving a few flowers. I knew she wasn't there. My mum's faith made me certain of her destination, but it gave me a comfort to remember. Secret places became hard to find when I was raising my family. A pew at the View was not the most fragrant place to be alone, even with its lovely view of the mountain. That's, as you know, a toilet. It was not long before my peace was shattered there anyway. Mum, where are you? I want you now. Satisfying those insatiable appetites left little time for secret places, washing, ironing, sewing, cooking. Yes, we looked after the body, but we fed the soul also. making our own entertainment. Couldn't afford the culture advertised on radio and TV. We sang around the piano. The children entertained us with concerts of music and drama. Yes, we fed the soul. But the spirit. That's where through the years I learned to find my secret place. It's possible to meditate while doing the mundane chores, and who doesn't find the garden an inspiration? I guess through the years I've learnt the value and wisdom given in the good old book, as so many others have done before me through the centuries. King David in the Psalms wrote these words thousands of years ago: "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Spine-tingling words. Through the joys and zests of life, and even when travelling through the valley of the shadow, I found strength and solace for the whole person in the secret place of the Spirit. Now, I wrote that one for our little Friday group around here, but I've given Clea some tears for that one. I said to Clea, I think I always write sentimental things, and she likes sentimental things. That's why I like sharing them with Clea, because we seem to be in the same wavelength, that we, Clea?
Very much.
Yes. So after I broke off the engagement with Bill, perfect. How would I have been being Mrs. Perfect? Having to live up to that. It was, a month or two after that I knew that Dot was coming up here with Margaret, and sounded as if she was enjoying herself at North Tynong. And so on Christmas Day in 1943, Dot and I went to church, and then Dad picked us up and brought us up to Tynong North. And Margaret, my friend, whose husband was a prisoner of war in Burma, was building this little tree house. She used to come up here regularly, and she felt that if she had a little place to sleep at night, it wouldn't bother the Weatherhead family if she didn't have to sleep in the big house. And so she invited me to help her. And I was there with the hammer in my hand and up in the tree house, banging away. And we looked down, and there were 3 young men. They'd come home from fighting fires on Christmas Day. It must have been a very hot time. And there they were, and they all had this black faces and shiny teeth, but there was one in particular, and he had a curly hair and shiny teeth and this black face, and they stood down there giving cheek to us. I don't think they thought we were really doing much good up where we were. And then, of course, that was how I first met Roy, and then we went into lunch later, and everybody was cleaned up nicely, and we were sitting around the big table in the Cornucopia homestead, and they always had the tradition that the girls wore Christmas bush in their hair, which is a pretty little native plant that's got a minty flavour and a little white with a touch of mauve in it. And so we had these in our hair, and we had our pretty frocks on and everything I suppose to impress the boys. And Grandma and Hazel had been preparing Christmas lunch. The Cornucopia home was absolutely known for its hospitality, and Hazel stayed at home. She didn't ever have a job outside the home. She enjoyed being home and helping Grandma and looking after her big brothers and her father. And so they were just wonderful, the way they could provide food for all those people. Mr. Weatherhead had a way of inviting the young people up from the churches in Melbourne, and they would come up, and the boys would stay in the big barn beside the Cornucopia house, and the girls would sleep in the house, fit in as best they could. And in that way he kept the family up here in touch with Christian values, but also meeting young people. And then we would all go over to what was called Upway. It's called Belgrave High, to be convention over in Belgrave in the Dandenongs, and 1,000 people would meet there, and you would meet a whole lot more people, and we'd go over in the old truck that not round the roads like they are today, over the mountain and down the other side. I just thought it was marvellous. I thought this man that could drive these trucks and fix these things was pretty good, So Roy and after that first night of singing around the piano after Christmas dinner and staying that weekend, that week when I got back to work, a letter arrived for me, and it was from Roy. And he told me afterwards that his father had suggested he write to that girl. So I think I won Roy's father's heart before I won Roy's playing the piano and singing around the piano with him, because that was one of the things that he loved most, And so then Margaret used to come up and we'd bring our bikes on the train and ride in from the station here out to the home. And then afterwards at the weekend they would put our bikes on the truck and take us as far as Berwick, and then we would ride from there to Dandenong to come home. And
On a push bike?
on a
Oh
push.
my
Oh,
gosh.
we were energetic in those days, weren't we? Yes, Margaret was a great rider. She used to ride everywhere. She was very good. But and so I came up regularly and absolutely loved the atmosphere up here and enjoyed the company of the family and all the music and the things that went on, and the wildflowers round about, and getting out in the truck with the boys, because when I think of it now, we were horrors, because we used to just expect that when we came back, Grandma and Hazel would have these meals ready for us. I suppose we washed up, but we didn't do much preparing for them. And but I think that Grandma, in her quiet way, enjoyed just having the company of young people around too, and certainly Mr. Weatherhead did. And so within, I suppose, it would have been about 3 months. I've told the story about when I was out. It was a moonlight night, and not far from where the cornucopia house is now, there was a big tree, and Roy had the truck under the tree and he was fixing something. He was always fixing something, Roy, because he was the mechanic of the family. And I was standing there holding a spanner for him or something, and he's working away on the truck, and all of a sudden he asked me to marry him, and I didn't say no. Years afterwards I said to old Mrs. Minton, our neighbour here, that Roy proposed to me under a truck. Typical Weatherhead, she said.
Can I pause it for a sec?
Yeah. Just dug this little poem out that I wrote a long time after that time that he proposed to me, but it's called My Hero. There's a man I know who's been around for 50 years or more, and do you know, I still feel good when he walks in the door. I guess it's 'cause through all the ups and downs, his dependability, his constancy in this changing world gives me security. I won't say he's an angel, but I think you'll all agree my hero's earned a medal the way he's cared for the kids and me. My Roy. Yes, so that was written, that proved that saying yes on that moonlight night under the tree was the right thing to do, didn't it? The heat, look at them, they pour little things. For them last night, I think. Might be watered them enough. No, I think that it's marvellous to have that video. If we hadn't had that party, we wouldn't have all those people,
Yeah.
Is it high? Just say if you want me to talk.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yes. When I was talking earlier in the video about my nanny and how much she meant to me growing up as a little girl, she lived till I was 13 and a very, very special part of our family. And I mentioned that to my nephew and niece, Neil and Vivian, and they said, well, come down to Melbourne and we'll take you to where Nanny's grave is in the old Melbourne cemetery. I hadn't been there since I went to Nanny's funeral that day. So I went down and they took me to the cemetery. They'd already had a look at the plans and found out exactly where Nanny's grave was. And it was in where about the 1901 burials were, and they were very distinct because that little tile that you can see there, they were the surrounds of the grave were these little tiles, tanny sort of tiles with patterns on them. And it just happened that Nanny's had oak leaves and acorns on it. And we stood there just talking about Nanny, and I was giving some memories of Nanny to Neil and Vivian, and then Neil picked up one piece of tile and he said, I really think you should take this home with you, Auntie Lal. And so we decided to do that, and I said, well, I'll make a little spot in my garden in memory of Nanny. So when I came home I found this little bit in the oak tree, very appropriate because the tile's got oak leaves on it, and just wrote the little thing in the back in memory of Nanny from 1843 to 1935. So when you think about it, Nanny was born at the very, the very early days of the colony in Victoria. Her parents were farmers, I think, and her, when she was a little girl, she used to talk about her father taking her to visit the goldfields and talking about the Aborigines that lived around them and all those sort of stories. I don't remember a lot about that, but my sister Vi, Nanny, used to talk to about that. But I thought this little spot was quite a sweet little memorial to Nanny. And this is a tree that the grandchildren loved when they were little and learned to climb, of course, and had lots of fun around in Nanny's garden. It looks very dry this year because it's a drought year, but the oak tree's going very well. But you didn't see it there after 80 years. Dad loved the old Sankey hymns, and when I'd come up into the lounge here and start playing, it would only be a few minutes before he'd be up here listening. He used to just love them, and Sweet Hour of Prayer is one that goes back to his father and to his father before him, to Horatio. They all loved it. Dad's favourite was Sweet Hour of Prayer. Emma used to sing that when we would go to the nursing homes around this area, and I would play the harp, and Clea and Emma would sing a duet, and that was one of the songs that they used to sing. Do you remember?
I do.
In the Sweet By and By. And another favourite was be burning, and Roy and I had a lovely courtship, really, with me coming up weekends here and doing things around the farm with him and just enjoying the general atmosphere of cornucopia and meeting, of course, Peggy and Cyril, who were engaged by that time, and then later on Max was engaged to Mary. Cyril and Peggy were married first, and then Roy and I had our date for March in 1945. It was, and we were married at the Newport Baptist Church. And we had our honeymoon. At that time I had lovely friends in the aircraft, and there were no cars, of course. You had to travel everywhere by train. And so the very first night of our honeymoon we spent at now what was a little suburb outside Melbourne that one of my friends from the aircraft lived, and she made her home available. They moved out for the Saturday night, and we went there on the train after our wedding, and went to stay in this little house, and everything was prepared for us, and it was lovely. And then the next day we set off for Mount Macedon, and that was where we spent our honeymoon, in a guest house called the Bungalow. Very, very nice. And then we had a fortnight there, and Mr. Weatherhead, Roy's father, met us with the truck at the Tynong station and brought us home here. And then, of course, the men had to go back to work. They were working over in the mountains in Warburton, logging, and they had to continue for a year after the war finished to get these logs out to get ready for the Upper Yarra Dam. And on the Monday morning, Mr. Weatherhead just came for a walk with me up to where you could look up at where our little house was built, and there was just absolutely nothing. It was just a clear, more or less a clear paddock, a few trees and things. And he was saying that he'd like you should have a pond in there, a pond here and something else somewhere else. And I'd been married a whole fortnight, and I said to him, if you want grandchildren, I'm not going to have a pond in my front garden. He liked you to say what you thought. He didn't like you to just take everything he said. You had to really stand up to him a bit. And then he started to talk about his ideas. Every weekend when we came home, he had something planned for the boys to do. And this one seemed a little far out to me because he pointed over to where Mill Valley Ranch is today, which was just the calf paddock, and he said, you know, one day there's going to be a lake over there and there's going to be something for children. It's going to be just something where children can play. And I thought, oh, that's Granddad, that's one of his brainwaves, you know. And it just sort of went over my head and I forgot all about it. But that afternoon he was putting the drive into our house, and he had the old Fordson tractor, which was a very heavy steel, cumbersome tractor, and he hadn't laced up one of his boots, and it got caught in the clutch, and the tractor turned back over on him, and of course it badly injured him. I could see that, you know, and Max was there, he was watching him, and he lifted the tractor off him. We don't know to this day how he ever got that off him. There were no phones, there was nobody that could drive to go and get help. And so I ran round to a neighbour's to get a nurse to help, and Max and Hazel tried to get the truck out. They got it out as far as the gate, but neither of them could drive. And so at that time, just while I was around getting the nurse, the ranger from the mountains here, but I can't think what you call him, but he drove past and saw what had happened and went and got the doctor, but he'd already died. It was too late. But so it was very sad because we had to get the message through to the boys over in the mountains. They'd only left that morning, and it was sad because they worked very well with their father. He was the focal point and had kept them working together through their teens and everything. And so it was a whole new beginning for those boys to have to run everything on their own. And of course Grandma was left on her own too. But the funeral was held at Bunyip. But
How old were you when you got married, Nanny?
I was 22, or 20, just 22. Yeah.
And Granddad was 20?
No, Granddad was 6.5 years older. He was, he would have been nearly 28. Yes. But anyway, so things changed a bit from then on. It wasn't that long before the men came back here to work, and they started up the steam sawmill just over the bridge, over the Cannibal Creek Bridge there. And so when I was first married, that was, my memories are of getting the meals here, hearing the mill whistle go at dinner time, and knowing that I had to have something for Granddad to eat on the table before he got home, and being a city bride, it wasn't always ready for him. Peggy Cyril's wife had grown up in a big family. She was much more domesticated than I was. There was only Peggy and Roy and I married at that time, and actually while the men were working away, Peggy and I lived in Grandma's house in the big cornucopia house through the week, and Peggy came up here until Cyril had built their little house over the creek there. And of course Hazel at this time was being courted by the headmaster of the Tynong North school, who was a real gentleman, Uncle Clarence. He was a lovely man, and so we all, you know, had things to do together. I remember the day that war actually finished, VE Day I think it was. I can remember us all going for a walk and a picnic up the hill here, up to Jolly's Orchard, and just taking a little picnic up there to celebrate very quietly the end of the war. Clary couldn't go to the war either because he'd had a very serious operation when he was young, so he wasn't able to go. And because our men were man-powered, so when war finished, it was a different story. And then, as I said, about a year after that, they were able to come home and work here and work the sawmill. So I think it was, how long it was, a year and a bit afterwards, after we were married, that our first baby boy was born, Bruce, and then 2 years after we had our little girl. And by that time, this little house was starting to look much more homely, because when we were first married, you couldn't, the windows weren't even covered because you couldn't get the glass, you couldn't get the lining for the house, and the kangaroos pounded up and down along the back of our channel. It was quite some time. We had a neighbour who was very good at papering, and we managed to get the corrugated cardboard that we now see in cardboard boxes, you know, and that papered the walls, and then, or that went on the walls, and then he papered it and then calcimined it. So it looked very nice for the first year or two, but of course it didn't last. And then after a few years we were able to get plaster. But to me, just having that little house on the hill and making the curtains and the bedspreads and all the things that went along with homemaking, I just really loved the life up here. And of course the little Methodist church was around here, and they knew that I'd been involved at Newport Baptist, so it wasn't long before I was teaching Sunday school around here and playing the organ in the little church and things like that, in between having babies and all the things.
What hospital did you have Uncle Bruce and Mum in?
I had Bruce in 1948 and Barbara in...
Bruce
in
in
1946 and Barbara in 1948.
Yeah, sorry, I said what hospital?
Oh, I had Bruce in the Pakenham Hospital. All the Weatherhead boys up to that time had been born in Pakenham Hospital, and the girls were born in Bunyip. For some reason we went that way. It was a little nursing home in Bunyip, and the girls were born there. And so when it came time for Max and Mary were married, and Mary went to have her firstborn, she went confidently off to Pakenham to have a baby boy and had a little girl. And of course she was to have 2 more little girls. But yes, the nearest doctor was in Garfield, and we did most of our shopping in Garfield. And when the men were working away, Hazel was the driver with the Buick that I learned to drive in, a sedan sort of a car, and we would hook up the trailer, and on shopping day there would be Grandma and me and Bruce and Barbara and Peggy and Joan and Peter and Grandma, all in the one car going off to Garfield to shop. It was like the hillbillies come to town when we used to pile out of the car. People told us afterwards they used to love to see us riding into town to do our shopping. All the kids, all everything, and then we'd put all our gear in the back in the trailer. But the whole trouble was when Hazel drove home, she couldn't turn the trailer, so she had to drop me off at the bottom of my hill, and she had to drop Peggy's things off at the bottom of the hill too. So Peggy always would leave her pram here, and you'd hear Peggy going home with her groceries in the thing, and Joan the baby in the pram, and Peter going on strike halfway up the road and sticking his little bottom down and yelling and not wanting to move an inch. I was lucky. I just had to carry my groceries a bit at a time up the hill to the house here, you know. But they were. When you think about it now, who would do that in shopping? But everything had to be combined because petrol was scarce, and one car between everybody. And because when we were married, there was only the truck. It was the truck that Mr. Weatherhead met at the station with. There was no cars in the family in those days. So, but when Roy's father was killed, that was when I decided that I really had to learn to drive. It was necessary in the country to learn to drive. And so I learnt when, not long after Barbara was born, and got my licence in the old Buick. And so when, by this time, Dot and Jack were married and living around in Snell Road, and I used to put Barbara in the baby's bath, in between the back seat and the floor, and pack her in with cushions and things like that, and Bruce sitting beside me, and off I'd drive round to see Dot. I didn't have to go out on the highway because I could go through Clark Road and round. The roads were pretty rough, but it was possible to get to Dot's without going on the highway, and that was how we used to travel around. I don't think I ever took it into the shops. The Hazel mostly did the driving for the shops in those days, but I did learn to drive, and the old Buick was a very reliable car. Later on, we had it for quite a while because I used to go in that to teach Sunday school and take the children in the car, and I learned to double declutch going up the little bit of a hill round here near Clark Road. Thought I was very smart when I was doing that, but it was necessary to be able to drive. And then later on, Peggy never learned. She didn't ever. I don't think Cyril wanted her to learn to drive really, but Mary did, and by that time they had a Chev car, and Mary was a much more braver, more confident driver than I ever was. She drove more confidently in her later years than I ever did, and further, you know. But I'm always glad I learned to drive because it's very necessary in the country for you. And I'm very glad I can still drive to get to the town when I do have to, and to church, because it's very good for your independence when you're old. But I won't do it when it's any danger to anybody, so the family can relax. I enjoyed having my first little baby boy, and Bruce, and he had his little ways with him that were really cute. He used to love to just go and sit out under a tree, and he'd just sit with his back to the tree and watch the wind for ages. He just loved to dream around, Bruce. And then, of course, it was wonderful to have a baby girl. And although I hadn't done an awful lot of dressmaking and things, I loved making clothes for Barbara. And, we made lots of lovely little outfits. Every year for the Sunday school anniversary, you had a new pretty frock. And I can remember knitting the jumpers and making little pleated skirts. Very brave in those days. The hardest thing was making the boys their pants, because we made them out of material that we already had, maybe something that Roy had worn or something, and you had to put the lining in, and the lining was made out of the bags that you bought your flour in. It was calico, and you boiled that up plenty of times in the copper and got it nice and soft, and then that made the lining of the boys' pants. But you had to be sure that you got the legs in the right way, or when you turned them out they were all crooked or something. But I enjoyed making the children's clothes when they were little, and they always looked very sweet and very nice. David was born, I think, in 1952, so if Bruce was 1946, Barbara 48, and then David 52, that was another 4 years after Barbara, yes. And then I wondered what I'd struck when I had my little David, because he was a live wire. The others, they loved their little games and things, but they were nothing like David. David was just a restless little boy from when he was little, and I never knew what he was getting up to next. He wasn't naughty, he was just on the go all the time. You had to keep your eye on him. And when Auntie Dot and I used to go shopping, by that time she had Pam and Jenny, and I had Bruce and Barbara, and we would go up to the market in Warrigal or something. always Auntie Dot would come to keep her eye on David so that I had time to concentrate on what I was buying. but somehow or other, he was only 2 or something when he followed Grandad down to the lighting plant down here that we had for the 32 volts that ran our electricity at that time, and somehow came under Grandad's legs and got caught up in the belt and went over and bang, and Grandad brings him up to me with his hand flattened and we had to take him up to the Warrigal Hospital, and I'm saying to Roy on the way up there, one day he'll be worth it, one day he'll be worth it, because I couldn't catch up with him. And then when he went to school, he was still, every report was, David is a very restless boy. David is still a restless boy. And then the teacher said, I know how to, when I went in to see her, she said, I know what to do with him, you just keep him busy. That's all he needs, is to be kept busy. And so that was our little David, but he was a cute little boy, and he was a very clever little boy in lots of ways, and he's certainly grown up to the things that he used to love to play with, of course, were spanners and things, and I remember him sticking a potato up the exhaust of the car and all sorts of things. And you'd find bolts and nuts in the weirdest places and things. But yes, and then of course Roy and I just relaxed then. We had our family, you see, and then I remember when they were teenagers, I used to have a lot of children. Somehow or other I seemed to be always looking after children at the district that needed looking after along with our family. And Auntie Dot wasn't well when Pam and Jenny were only 2, Pam was 3, David was 2, Pam was 3 and Jenny was 5. And so when Auntie Dot was sick, I went round to see her and I said, well, I could take Pam or one or the other, and Auntie Vi will take the other, and I could see the look on Dot's face, and I came home to Roy and I said, can we take them both, because she just looked so sad. And so that's what happened. And so for a year I looked after Auntie Dot's Pam and Jenny with my children here, and Grandad happened to be staying here at the same time too. But it was well worth it, because Auntie Dot went in, she had TB, and she went into the sanatorium, they called it in those days, and she just relaxed. She really, in her lovely, quiet Christian way, she just handed those children over to God and to me. And it was just as if they were my children. And because she did that, she got better. She never looked back after that year. She used to have to, I don't think she ever got the same outgoing in her way of life that I did because of that, but she never got the TB back again. And it was mainly because the way she accepted what had happened and the fact that she handed those children over to me. And so I always seemed to be having other children here or something. And then I started to wonder when I had these teenagers around me, and went off to the doctor, and I said to him, I think it's old age creeping on. And he put me up on the thing and he started chuckling and he said, you're pregnant. I said, what? I've got to go home and tell Roy. But we were delighted, and of course we would never be without our little Andrew, and everybody Barbara just absolutely loved Andrew. She used to cart him round and sing to him and do all the things like big sisters did, and they all did, all the teenagers that I had here at that time, because I used to have them from the Sunday school and the youth group and everything. They were all so good to Andrew, even when we went on holidays in the caravan, we'd always take another boy with David or with Bruce, and they all helped to look after Andrew when he was a little boy. And so the family grew. Of course, in the meantime, we started off, of course, with the copper out in the wash house and the ringer and the things that you had in those days, and and the pew with a view up on the hill that was the toilet, and we did have running water, and no hot water though, of course, and things like that. But as the years went by and we got the SEC on, that was when that made life much easier. When we got our first proper refrigerator, we had the little Coolgardie safe when we were first married, and then we got the Silent Night, which was a kerosene refrigerator, and that worked very well. And then, of course, the next one was the proper electric thing. And when we got our first little washing machine that had a spin dry, we thought we were in heaven, because that was so good for woolies and things like that, you know. But we also knitted you didn't buy things, you knitted everything for the children. When they were little, because this house was quite cold, we only had the one open fire and the little wood stove here. When they were little, I'd always put a loose-fitting woolen jumper on them at night in the winter, so that when they woke up and they were playing around the house or in their cots, they were still warm, you know, around their tops. And when you look back, and the lamps and the things, I quite liked the old lamps. They gave the house a nice mellow look, but I didn't object once we got the electricity. It was so much easier. After my mother died, my sister Vi she always seemed to be older than us. Lots of fun in it, but she was always the sort of rock of the family. And so when she married Arthur and went to live in Kyabram, when I got my little home here in Tynong North, she used to love to come and visit with the children, with her children, Neil and Ian, and we used to go up there too and visit them. We used to go up on the steam train in those days, and I can remember one holiday that Roy couldn't come with us. He had to come later, and so Barbara and Bruce and I went up on the train. And when we got up there, Barbara was just desolate. She wanted her daddy, and she stood in Vi's kitchen, and she just stood there and she kept saying, "But I want my daddy here." And he put right beside her, and she carried on about wanting my daddy here. And I think Roy appeared probably a day or two after he came up in the car, and all was well. But the holidays in Corrigan were a great highlight of our life. And then Vi loved to bring the boys down here, and Kitty and Harold used to come and stay with their children too. They all loved to come up to the country here, and Harold and Roy got on so well because of their interest in mechanics and all the things like that. They were really mates. And then when Auntie Vi and Arthur had to move to Melbourne because the boys were going to uni, and Neil, he just loved the country. He missed very much living in Kyabram. So Vi always says that Neil would have finished up a delinquent if she hadn't been able to send him up to me for the school holidays. And Neil just loved coming up here, and he often laughs now because he points out all the projects that he did up here. He dug the hole for the septic tank, and he restored one of the old steam engines, and he can tell you, you can reel off all these jobs he did when he used to come up. Every holidays it seemed as if Roy had something for him to concentrate on, you know. But he really did love coming up here, and I think that's why there's such a bond with Neil, with Barbara and Bruce, and of course Andrew was a baby, and Neil by that time had started his doctor's degree, and I can remember him coming. He must have been a first year student, and when Andrew was born, I remember him laying him out on the table here and checking him all over, every little part of him, and trying out his reflexes and all the things. Before he declared him, he was a beautiful baby, but Neil did all that to him. And the kids just loved having Neil up here, and I just really enjoyed Vi's company, because I remember one time they all got... I came home from hospital with David, and I got chicken pox, and of course the poor little baby was sucking chicken pox because I had it everywhere, and so Roy rang up Auntie Vi, and she came down to the rescue, and she looked after all of us, and then the poor girl went home and had shingles, because there's a link between chicken pox and shingles. But she didn't have it for long. She got over it pretty quickly. But no, it was really lovely. And through the years, and so, you know, all the Auntie Kitty's children, Judy and Val, may have got really good memories of coming up here for holidays when they were children. And so have Ian and Neil. But I think Alan... he belonged to a family who worked in the sawmill here. Through the years, the men employed people on the sawmill, and there were lots of... they were transient people. They weren't... Alan's father was really what you would call quite an alcoholic, and they had about 5 children, and they lived in the house on the mill there. A lovely little mother that looked after the children, but the father was an alcoholic, and they went up to a party at one of the neighbours' houses, and she had a stroke, Alan's mother, and died, and he was left with these 5 little children. And they came to me for a little while, and then I couldn't keep them, and so but little Alan was always seemed so vulnerable, and Roy and I were thinking perhaps we should take him and look after him, and then Harold and Kitty heard about this, and they'd always wanted to have a little boy, and they had the 2 girls, and so they went ahead and finally adopted Alan. And it took him a few years to settle into the family, because he'd had a lot of memories of things that weren't good when he was a little boy. But now he just speaks so highly. He's a married man with a grandchild now. But it's lovely to hear him speaking so highly of Harold and Kitty and the opportunity that they gave him to make something of his life. And he married a lovely girl, Lorraine Allen, and she's been a real rock in his life, and a lovely mother to his children, and now a grandma. So that was just another little branch of the family that came out of a little bit of tragedy in Tynong North, but actually there were quite a few different families around that I helped with. Our Robert Turnbull that Barbara brought home when he was about 16. He'd gone into the Royal Melbourne Hospital, and Barbara and her girlfriend Joan, who was a nurse, looked after him. And he was such a wild little fellow, because he'd had a really hard upbringing. He was adopted, and he reacted to that, and his father was very hard on him. His mother was kinder, but his father was very hard on him. And he finished up pinching his uncle's car or something and getting caught and put into Lambie, which was the detention centre. And finally, the boys there, he'd broken his arm, and they put him under the shower, and that infected, and he had to go into the hospital. And in the hospital, he was so wild that he actually kicked Joan from one side of the ward to the other, Barbara's friend. And Barbara said to him, "If you behave yourself, I'll come and visit you in here." And so she did for a little while, and then she said to him, "You know, if you really behave yourself, I'll ask my parents if you can go up there to visit them." And so when Robert was 16, on the day that Mill Valley Ranch opened, Robert appeared, and I met him in at the station. Well, he knows what he was like in those days. Never stopped talking. Couldn't tell him anything, and also he still was getting into trouble, you know. But anyway, we stuck with Robert, and through the years, through quite a few detention centres, quite a few jails. I went to speak for him in court a few times. By this time Barbara had gone overseas, so she wasn't here to help with Robert. But through it all, he's turned out the most faithful boy. Absolutely loved Roy and just loves Barbara, all the family really, and he's very fond of the ranch people too. And it's, you know, it's talk about cast your bread on the waters and it comes back to you. Robert, every birthday, every Easter, every Christmas, the first card that arrives is from Robert with all the lovely thoughts and things in them. It's just beautiful. And he was very, very fond of Roy because we had him to stay on the farm for months at a time, you know. Absolutely wore your patience to a frazzle, you know. He talks proudly of that he was the first one that Roy ever wanted to hit on the head with a hammer. But anyway, we've still got our friend Robert, and that was actually Barbara's kindness in the hospital, that he always gives the credit to Barbara for her reaching out to him as a very troubled teenager and getting him to us, and then us sticking to him through the years, you know. Yeah, so that was just one of the things that happened with them. But I'll never forget when Barbara finished her nursing and came home and laid the map of the world on the floor and pointed to Afghanistan and said, "And that's where I'm going," and my hair stood straight on end. And, you know, sure enough, she did get there. She did a lot of travelling, and in India and Asia, and on very little money, and had a lot of different experiences, and in the meantime I was going through various operations and things that happened to me home here, you know. But the wonderful part about it was that always, just as things seemed I wasn't hearing from her or something, just at that time a letter would appear, and she'd be still there, and she'd be all right, but I did much praying in those days about my wandering daughter, and I do believe that God brought her back whole through all her adventures, because she certainly had some, and she did get to Afghanistan finally. Yes, but so that was Barbara's adventures. David, he did his apprenticeship. Bruce did his apprenticeship and lived down at Uncle Harold's through the week, and they were very good to him. He did his apprenticeship at Warren and Brown, and with where Harold worked, and Auntie Kitty was very good. That was a very safe spot for Bruce in Melbourne in those days, because he was as shy as sort of a boy. And then David did his apprenticeship in Pakenham, mechanic apprenticeship, but he developed his interest in car racing. That's given me high blood pressure over. I don't know whether it has, but it's enough to give any mother high blood pressure. and also his bike riding and things. But through these years, Graham and I ran the youth group here at North Tynong. Wonderful lot of young people, came from all around the district. It was the only youth club between Dandenong and Warrigal. And the kids came from everywhere, and they just loved it. And it was just a simple program of games and hikes and hay rides and the things that kids in those days enjoyed, you know. And we'd take them up to Youth for Christ up in Warrigal every month when they had the rallies up there, hundreds and hundreds of kids up there and bands and all that sort of thing. But they were really lovely days, and we had the house at Phillip Island that we bought when David was about 2, I think, must have been in 1954, just an old cheap cement sort of a place, but a rambling sort of a place, but you could fit a lot of people in it. And we had wonderful holidays down there with the kids from when they were little, right on the beach, just a little walk down to very safe beach. And then through the years, of course, they brought their friends down there. And I remember one holiday down there when we had the youth group, I counted up at the end of the holiday, and this isn't actually staying in the house, they had tents and they'd bring their cars down and all the rest of it. I counted up at the end of the holiday and there had been 80 through that place in a fortnight, and coming and going. And when I finished up, there was more food in the house than when I'd started, because the mothers were so good of these youth club kids. They'd send a box of things down, you know, and the kids were good. Every morning we'd get up and they'd make the sweets for the day. We made our own ice cream, and they made jellies and all the things, jellied fruit and things like that. And then at night we'd just make a big roast with lots of roast vegetables and things, and in the daytime they'd just have a sandwich or something like that. But it was no trouble. We had so much fun down there with those kids, and they all... I still see them round today, and so many of those youth club kids say to me now, wish we had now for our kids what we had in those days, you know. And so, and then of course they all went their own ways. Barbara met Arthur in Nepal, and then we had our lovely little granddaughter that I went over to America to visit when she was only 3 months old, and that was just lovely. And Bruce married Linda, and David and Cheryl were married a fortnight later and lived in Pakenham. And then of course nowadays we have our Andrew living right here with Shannon, who is a lovely girl to have living next door to me. So I feel I've been very blessed with my family, and of course later on Barbara married Jeffrey, and then they came over to Australia, and that was when I had my little grandchildren actually living up on the farm, and that was wonderful, because you know, I think if you can have them close to you, you really bond. I loved our little granddaughter over in America, Clea. What would you have been, 5 when you came?
I was 9 when I came
here, yes. But Roy and I were able to visit a couple of times over there, and I remember this cute little girl that we used to visit in Florida, and the very first time, she was a baby when I went over there, and then the next time you would have been about 4 or 5, you were talking anyway, you know, and you took us in and you sat us down in front of the television. Anne was talking about different things, and you'd say, now, you don't really have to believe what he's saying. He's trying to tell you that that's good for you, but it's not. And you had, and you had all the things about food thoroughly worked out, what was good for you and what wasn't. But the minute we got out shopping, the things that they just went by the board, and out wanted the ice creams and the things that. But you absolutely knew the theory off-packed. You knew exactly what was good for you. And then you turned around to Roy and I and you said, how come you guys don't know all about this? Is that angle of my face good? When I think I was about 69 or something, when Harold brought the whole setup up here, because he had terminal cancer and knew that he wasn't going to be doing for very long, and for a long time he'd been hinting about me learning the harp, but I'd always sort of dodged around, you know. But anyway, when he arrived in the kitchen carrying all this, I said to Roy, I think he really means me to learn that, you know. So in the next month or two I had to go at it, and by Christmas I had a little tape that I could send to him for Christmas, and he passed away in February, and it actually was the best thing he ever did for me, because for Uncle Arthur and Vi had been to Britain, and they brought back lovely slides of England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and then Arthur suggested that we get together and do a program with them showing about a dozen slides of a country, and then I would sing the songs of that country, and England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and it made a lovely little program to take into all the different nursing homes. So we went from Warrigal to around Melbourne with doing that little program until Uncle Arthur got where he wasn't that well, and then I started to do it myself in the nursing homes until I think Roy wasn't very well, and I couldn't do it after that. But one of the songs that I used to do in those days was Amazing Grace, but you've got to realise that there's a big difference in voice when you're 80.